Flosstube. My name is Becca, and I'm SamBrie Stitches here on YouTube and other social media platforms. This is a special edition of Interview with a Flosstuber. I am very excited and honored to be here with Arlene Cohen, who is the talented designer behind Works by ABC. Arlene's designs include unique mandalas, beautiful Jewish pieces, which I personally love, a couple of special reproduction samplers, which we're going to talk about in a little bit, and a whole lot more that you need to go check out as well. She has a Flosstube channel as well. So if you're not familiar with any of Arlene's work, all of the links are going to be down below. So if you could go show her some love, subscribe, follow, do all those awesome things, that would be great. Before we jump into the questions, would you mind telling us a little bit more about yourself?
Sure. I have been a stitcher my whole life, but my other side of my creative life is being a middle school math teacher. So I have this like teaching, working with kids side of life and my creative stitching life. I live in New Jersey, so I just keep myself busy with stuff around here. I've, you know, I just love what I'm doing right now in terms of balancing my life between the working with kids and that aspect and the creative side. And I think that's just the most important aspect to me that keeps me going in a lot of ways.
How neat. That is so neat that you're able to do both, which is really cool.
Yeah, yeah.
So since it's Sampler September, and I know that you do have a few reproductions that you have done, and I know that you mentioned they're special. So if we could talk a little bit more about that, tell us like what drew you to the samplers and that kind of stuff, that'd be great.
Sure. So if you're not familiar with my work or my stitching style or anything like that, I love it when there's a good story. When there's a story, either where my inspiration came from or anything a story. And usually in my patterns, I like to write out that story because I know when I've stitched a design that's not my own, and if there's some like interesting background, I was inspired by a tile that I saw somewhere, I'd like to know those pieces of information, so that's why I like to share them. And so when it comes to samplers, now I will go back a number of years. I've been stitching basically my whole life, but 10, 15 years ago, when I first heard about this idea of stitching reproduction samplers, and I know at the time I thought, well, why would you ever want to stitch something that some kid stitched 200 years ago? Like, I didn't understand the appeal. I could always respect this is what is interesting to other people. It just was in no way interesting to me. And I was having a hard time understanding as I came to learn just how interesting it was to so many people. And over time, and some of it is related actually to a needlework conference, like an academic conference that I attended, and learned just how much there was to the stories behind samplers. Not that you know every story from every sampler, but there were some talks and lectures about some specific things. And I thought, okay, I can understand the appeal of a story. As I've been designing the last few years, reproduction samplers has not been in my repertoire, partially because there's so many designers out there that do some beautiful things. But again, I'm always attracted when there's a good story. So the first sampler I did a couple years ago um, I'll give full credit to a stitching friend who had posted on Instagram. She had seen a picture of a sampler and she basically said, does anyone know if there's a chart for this? And often, when you're on Instagram, you're kind of like scrolling. And there was something I'm so glad I caught her words because I saw a picture of a sampler and I'm ready to kind of go past it. And there was something about, well, why would she want a chart of this one? And then I saw why she wanted a chart of this one. So, long story short, it appealed to me so much as well. And I started researching, where is this sampler? What would it take to get the permit? I figured out where it was. I got in touch with them. I asked for their permission and I was able to reproduce it. What makes it special, and so this is my reproduction of Rosina Dizery. And if you could see down here, age 15, and she is from the New York African Free School. And that was just so fascinating to me. It just jumped out. There's got to be a story there. I didn't know if I could learn the whole story, but there, in doing some research, there's only a very few samplers that have been stitched out there that are known to have been stitched by Black girls. There's plenty out there that could be have stitched and no one would know, because if they didn't leave any particular,
Something to
anything that
that.
gives any indication who they are, let alone the name of a school. And so that's what made this one so unique. It is in the collection of the New York Historical Society, and that's partially, well, I could, in tracing out the history of it, the African Free School, and so this is from 1820, which existed in New York. I don't remember the exact dates of when it closed, but the New York Historical Society has all the records, like has the archive of that. And so when this sampler came up for sale 10, 15 years ago, the dealer that recognized it knew how special it was, and in doing that research, basically went to the New York Historical Society and said, I want to offer this to you guys first, and they made it happen. So what was thrilling also was to discover Rosina. Yes, so many times on these samplers, they're just a name. And when you're lucky, you can learn, so you could do some research behind them. What is very rare, sampler or not, to have a name of a Black person, especially a female, from 1820, and to actually do and find research about her is so rare. And this is not me. Don't give me the credit for the research. What I found was the incredible research that had been done, mostly by the dealer who had sold it. And what's just so fascinating to me is that there's very little known about her early life, in all of that. But picking up, I think about in the 1840s when she got married, her and her husband mostly, were actually very well known within the Black community in New York City. And because of that, there's information about them. And they actually were they did very well. They owned a catering business, which I think is not quite the same way our brains think about catering business in the 21st century. But within the food industry, when her husband died first. When she died, her will, and I'm not going to remember the number, but left it was like $100,000 to her son. I mean, it is such an interesting story. Now, when I put this out, it's important to me. I included like 4 pages of an essay with everything that I found out about her, because this is the piece that interests me.
Yeah.
So as a sampler, I mean, if it wasn't for the details, all right, there's baskets, there's fruit, it's very similar. And my eyes, like I said, I would have kept scrolling. But I liked something that's really special and unique. And that's how Rosina came to be in my repertoire of designs.
I
Okay.
love that.
So after putting this out, which was very well received in the community of stitchers that are just looking for something that is special and unique and represents an aspect, an area that doesn't always get represented in sampler world. I had a number of people reaching out to me. Have you heard of this one? Do you know anything about that one? And was trying to pursue a few different directions. As part of that, I was reading a book, and the story of this is always read the footnotes because in a chapter of this book that was about, well, I couldn't even tell you exactly what it was about, but in a footnote, there was mention about different religion and how, Protestant versus Catholic and samplers and so on and so on. But in a footnote, there was a mention of, well, the Smithsonian has some samplers with Hebrew alphabets on it, so we believe this is an example of Jewish representation. And I'm like, I'm all over that, smithsonian.edu, okay? And so I learned that, yes, there are, through the American History Museum has these two samplers that nothing, unfortunately, the story is unknown. But I love when again, trying to go through the channels. How do I figure out if I can have the permission to do this? And I love, my email got passed to a few people, and the person who responded basically and her last line was, and by the way, I am a stitcher. So she knew exactly what I was
Oh,
asking for.
you got lucky.
And so This was the second sampler that I put out. B. Hollander. At times I wanted to make up what the B stood for, and then I'm like, well, that doesn't respect her enough. So I just refer to her as B, which certainly could be like Beatrice or something, which is not very much of a Jewish name, so unlikely. The date on this is 1845, and there is the Hebrew alphabet up there. And again, it's one of those things, if you scroll too fast, you're like, all right, it's got a bunch of alphabets on it. But
But
to
yeah,
pause and see the unique thing that's up there. And
yep.
so because there is nothing to be known about B. Hollander, even in the information that the Smithsonian have of how it came to their collections, is sort of so bizarre. It came within a larger collection that was donated by this husband and wife collected, all these kinds of things, and thrown in there were these couple of samplers, and they don't really know where they came from. They and but the two samplers clearly are similar enough that they were likely stitched either from through the same teacher or at the same time period, something very similar. They different names. And so, because I didn't have a story about B, there's nothing to be known about her. What I did include in my pattern for this is a lot about Hebrew. And because the other aspect, when I started doing the research that I had no idea about, is that 1845 was not a time when Hebrew was a modern language. Like I don't know what I did or did not think before this, but Hebrew is a rare example of something that was referred to as a dead language that has been completely brought back to life. And that was thanks to, in the 1870s, 1880s, the latter half of the 19th century, there were some folks, and I forget where in Europe, that basically in effect said Hebrew was always part of biblical life and religious life and all of that, but basically said we need to bring this back to our world. And there was a couple that started with their own child, and they had to invent words. Like the Hebrew Bibles don't have a word for train. They had to come up with these things. And they raised their son without a single word of English. They were determined to have a native, like to create a native. It's a fascinating story on how this all, and I just learned so much from it. And so I shared what I could in terms of the story. So it's just so interesting in terms of, you know, we have to assume she was Jewish. We don't know where this was stitched. It could have been in the US. It very well could have been somewhere in Europe. At that time, girls, we assume it's a girl, would not have been the Jewish religion, traditional Jewish religion, the females are nowhere near as important as the males. And at this time, would girls necessarily have learned Hebrew? Like, because the boys would, because they'd be going to religious school, because they would need to be participating in services and so on. And it was interesting, again, to do the research of this, not much known out there, but what I could find was that, yes, up through a certain age of 6 or 8, girls would be educated in the same way boys were, because the typical traditional female role, they needed to grow up and run a Jewish kosher home. And so they needed basically the rudiments of Hebrew to be able to do that, to say prayers over the candles or something. So it is not unreasonable that there was a girl, the girls probably did know their Hebrew at that time, their letters, some basic words. So again, a unique piece of history that often doesn't get represented in sampler world. Um, and the colors on this I just thought were really interesting. It is pretty clear from the pictures that at least some of the wackiness, particular in this area, is due to damage. The pictures from the Smithsonian and fully acknowledge there's some damage, and so I was making some educated guesses when it came to particularly this alphabet. So, who knows what it actually looked like in 1845. So, I mean, just to be clear, these are not samplers I own. I know there's plenty, clearly, they're owned by museums. There are plenty of sampler reproduction designers that purchase, reproduce, and often can do research and everything. And that's never been my design interest because I have so many other interests. But like I said, it comes back to loving a good story. And both of these have a story behind them. And a lot of samplers have stories. I shouldn't,
Well,
I'm going to,
those call to you, the ones that you did call to you, that, yeah, has meaning to you.
exactly. And so just to be a little mysterious here, I actually am working on a third sampler right now. And I posted on IG the other day, and it was sort of like, duh, I'm stitching a sampler right now. It's Sampler September. I guess I am participating in this thing. It was so like just not thinking in that world, but it's another special one that I do not own and had to, jump through the hoops to get permission, but I will be excited to share it when it is ready to be shared. So,
That's pretty exciting. I'm currently stitching your Bee Hollander for my daughter. We talked about that. It's a
uh-huh.
beautiful piece. What I find absolutely amazing, because I do reproduce and I own the samplers. What I find amazing that you do is you reproduce from photos, which is incredible because it is absolutely challenging to physically have it and look at it under, a magnifier and try to match colors and all that stuff. And to do it from photos is absolutely incredible.
Well, yes, I will also say this, that I have learned, I can't say about every little, two-bit museum out there, but the museums that I've worked with have provided me with high resolution pictures. And
That's,
it's amazing how much you can zoom in when when you've gotten that
yeah.
in a way that I just was not aware that, man, I'd see that better than the highest magnification I could produce, with a physical item on my own. So there's something to be said about that if you have the ability to have that high resolution kind of imagery that, I mean, it's got to be done like through a scanning process and not just like a picture taking process. So, um, but I will share with you and anyone else who's interested the little Easter egg, so to speak, that I'm curious if you have discovered at all. So, the charting program that I use has most charting programs, I don't know, 100 some odd symbols that you can choose from. And I think most designers have the symbols they like to use and so on. There's one symbol that from the first time I ever looked at that list that I thought that I knew what it looked like to me. It looked like a Hebrew letter. And I had never wanted to use, I don't know what it was supposed to be, but it
Yeah.
looks like a Hebrew letter. And I have never used it in any of my charting because it looks like a Hebrew letter to me. Well, if you take a look at your chart and the color, and this is not the only letter that occurs from, but the color that this is a shin letter, you will see the symbol for this letter is this letter. So, and so, I mean, it shows up in other places, but it was like, if I'm going to do that, I have to do this. So, and so I've pointed that out to some folks who have, told me they're stitching it or something like that. Just the littlest, I've never used that symbol before. I'll probably only ever use it again. Well, I was thinking about this earlier, just on another, if we could go slightly off with a Hebrew tangent. One of the designs that I put out just like last week at the Needlework Marketplace is another Jewish design, and these are together, one pattern, okay, is
Wow,
we
those are so
say
cool.
shalom.
Yeah.
And this is shalom in English and shalom in Hebrew. And just again, we'll get more into this, but my interest in like geometry and symmetry and so on, it is actually the word shalom rotated all the way around. So, if I turn it like this, you can
Yeah, I
see.
did notice that. That's cool.
Um, and so I decided I wanted to do both the Hebrew and the English version of it. And for those who don't know, and actually, for those who don't know, might have been weird about the way I was pointing out on B. So Hebrew is read from right to left. So this is the first letter of the alphabet. And so I was doing this, which with some people,
Backward.
maybe
Yeah, backwards
backwards.
socks. Yeah.
So, so it worked out in a very kind of symmetrical geometric way is that so the first letter of shalom is here, but the first letter of shalom is here. And I was just thinking about today, and not that I would have, but man, there's another shin. I could have used that same symbol, but I didn't because it was the whole word.
That's so
But
cool.
there it is. Yes. So that's my little Easter egg about that.
I don't know how I missed that. I mean, I think I literally have just done the top alphabet so far because it's on linen for me. But now I'm gonna go back and look.
Yeah, and I think a lot of stitchers wouldn't necessarily pay that much attention to
Just,
anything behind the symbols other than, okay, that symbol is 426 and this
yep.
is 321 and so on. I think it's something as a regular, as a stitcher before I was a designer, I don't think I ever thought twice about other than like complaining when I thought a symbol was a bad symbol. Um, but I never thought about those kinds of things before. But like so many other things, when you start designing, you start thinking
I,
about things in
yep,
different
you start
ways.
thinking about all the little details and catch it all. I love that. Now I'm
Yep.
gonna have to go back and look because that's kind of cool. I may have to use that symbol if it's in my program. I haven't seen anything like it, but I'll have to check now.
Okay.
That's so cool. Well, that I love that you talked in depth about those pieces and how they were meaningful to you. I think I'm the same way when I get I don't just buy antique samplers to buy antique samplers. There's always something that like speaks to me or calls to me or has special meaning because I was the same way as you. If you go back and watch like my beginning floss tubes, people will comment on the most recent ones and be like, I was with you when you said you've never stitched samplers and you're not a sampler person and
Uh-huh.
you don't like them. And then now look at you, you're stitching them, you're reproducing them. So,
Mm.
I think I think for me, it's owning that piece of history. Yes, there's a motif or there's the quote or whatever it calls to me, but I'm the only one that owns that piece of history. I'm the one that's reproducing that piece. Like that to me is what made me fall in love with samplers. It took me several years to do so, but yeah, I was like the same as you. I was like, oh, samplers, whatever. Love it.
Yeah.
Um, yeah,
I guess that's one of the issues when you do videos on Flosstube is sometimes the things you said like 2, 3, whatever years ago come back to haunt you, so to
yep,
speak.
yep,
Hey, it's an example of where we all grow, whether we're as stitchers, as people, as whatever. And to go back and look at something you said whenever long ago, and now it's different. Hey, that's part of growth, in all kinds of ways.
yep, 100%.
Mhm.
Love that. All right, well, let's jump into the questions.
Okay.
The first one is why did you start a floss tube and were there any particular motivations?
Well, I think like a lot of other folks, I stumbled upon Flosstube about the whole idea of like I said before, I've been a stitcher my whole life, and I can't quite explain why it was that I didn't explore more of the stitching availability out there in an online way. I was aware, at least at that time, I did not really have a local store. I didn't really know any other stitchers. I always felt like I had to kind of explain myself to friends that this is what I enjoy doing, and that's what it was. And then, I mean, partially because some things in personal life had changed a little bit, I did start exploring a little bit online. And I can't say exactly what led me to. It was probably like a Facebook post or something where I learned, all right, on YouTube there's people who talk about stitching on YouTube, and I must have been given enough information to go and Google the word or get on YouTube and search Flosstube, and I thought this was so fascinating. And I for a couple of months I was watching, and then really a piece of it that I found so appealing was the comments, and to get a sense that in some cases it didn't seem like strangers. It seemed like people were commenting repeatedly, and the person who made the video was responding as if they were friends. And I was like, this is not just random videos on YouTube. This is a community. And I remember thinking, I want to be a part of that community. And I certainly, and I've maintained this from the very beginning, the Flosstube community, in my eyes, is not just the people who make the videos. It's also the people who watch the videos, because there are plenty of people who I know that watch videos will never get themselves in front of a camera, but they are so active in leaving comments and in share just in sharing what they've learned and seen on Flosstube. So, I mean, yeah, I was starting to leave comments and starting to be a part of the community. But I remember thinking, well, I have a lot of stitching I could share. I also felt, and I'll put this out there to anyone who's thinking about starting a floss tube, I also felt that I was a different kind of stitcher than what I was seeing on Flosstube, meaning I was seeing a vast majority was cross stitch. And my stitching world, I started cross stitch when I was in high school, and cross stitch has always been there. But at least at that time and to this day, I've gone to a lot of other different stitching types. I was doing canvas work, I was doing black work, a hard day, all those things. And I do remember kind of hesitating when I was starting this idea, like, well, I could show cross stitch. I have some cross stitch, but anything I'm currently doing right now is not a cross stitch. Will anybody be interested? And so I did what so many other people do, which is sort of to bravely put up a video and let's see what happens. And I just so appreciated becoming a part of the community from the other side. And I think, like most people who make Flosstube videos, discovering, hey, somebody's interested in the stuff I do. And that alone had so much appeal to me. So that's basically my how I got into Flosstube was a chance, the opening up of the idea of an online stitching community, the vaguely learning about Flosstube, the watching it and commenting it and deciding to bravely be a part of it in the other way. And when you get positive feedback on something, you kind of just keep going with it. And that's what's gotten me to keep going with it. So yeah.
That's incredible. I look at it that way too. When I entered the Flosstube world, and I think I discovered it just going down to the Acorns and Threads, which is my LNS 3 hours away. And just going to the first Thursday and then seeing all the other Flosstubers, and I was fangirling, and it
Uh-huh.
took me a little while, but just it was really challenging to record, like sit in front of the camera and talk to yourself, the first few times. Everybody says that, for your first few times. But almost 4 years later, there's still people that were with me from day one that are still so supportive and leave comments and have become friends. I mean, they were friends to begin with, but I mean, it's just incredible. And trying to explain it, because I bring my stitching everywhere. Like we were up at Hurricane Ridge, which is like a tourist area where you go hiking mountains. And I'm sitting there stitching while my husband's hiking, and people are walking by and they're like, I never thought to bring my stitching, on the trip or whatever. And I'd have my little business card and I'd be like,
Yeah.
and I'd be like, I'm on Flosstube, and they wouldn't know what Flosstube was. Like, it's just the community and the grow. It's incredible. It's just really incredible. And it makes you feel so welcome and so supportive. And when I started, I was feeling very alone and very not in a good place when I started Flosstube from, real life situations with friends and stuff. And Flosstube it's saved me. Like it's incredible, the community. So for that to be your reason to, jump in that's enough right there, just to have, friends and grow your community is amazing. It's
Absolutely. And
incredible.
and the offshoot of that is about stitching retreats, because I, in that first year, I started doing videos in 2017. And that fall, there were some floss tubers that were talking about getting together in person. And I thought, wow, I mean, they live in all parts of the country. How is that possible? And there was a retreat, and I don't know if there were ones before this, but the one that I was aware of in that fall that was calling itself a floss tube retreat. And I was so intrigued because I'm seeing people doing live videos and everything. And I know that person and that person, that person, but to see them all together in the same
Right?
frame. Um, so that actually led me to starting retreats. So to the idea of, hey, I can't go to one of those, logistics, all kinds of stuff. Maybe I could get everyone to come to me. um, and I did call it the New Jersey Floss Tube Retreat the first few years that I've done that, because it did come from that spirit of the community. And actually, just this past year, I did change the name, and I'm just calling it Stitch NJ, because I do recognize that there's a stitching world that is not into the floss tube community, and I want to, keep that in mind when trying to bring people together.
Yeah.
But it became this leap of an online virtual connection community that I never thought I would ever have, leading to an in-person opportunity that has spread in so many other directions. And just like, again, what a difference Flosstube has made in my life in so many different ways. And I repeat, I've been stitching my whole life, but just how different being a part of this community helped change things in a very positive way. So.
That's incredible. I hope that anybody who is even considering making a Flosstube channel just jumps in and does it, because
Mhm.
whether you get 100 subscribers or thousands and thousands of subscribers, I that used to matter to me, like the amount of subscribers. But just having just the few that stick with you, that care about you, and that, want to see what you're doing and want to talk with you, it's worth it. It's
Yep,
worth it in the long run for sure.
absolutely.
So I'm curious, how did you come up with your channel name, your designer name, your name, period?
All right, so this is a very clear-cut piece of advice for anyone, like you said, who is considering starting this. Okay, first piece of advice. If you're going on YouTube and you're like, I need to figure out how to do this, make sure you start a brand new account. Don't go on like I did. I recorded this video and then I'm like, all right, what do I do with it now? And I was probably Googling how to upload videos to YouTube. And I go to YouTube and oh my gosh, I have an account. I don't know. I didn't know I had an account. Oh, cool. And I go to upload it. And I remember going through the whole, well, what do I call myself? Because I've seen stitchers call themselves different things and I didn't have a name. And so I just left it as Arlene Cohen for that point. But then, especially because I got some wonderful positive feedback and everything, and I thought, okay, now I got to become a real stitcher, a real floss tuber, and come up with a name for myself. And and I remember playing around with this. And the other piece of my timeline is it was pretty soon after I started Flosstube videos that I decided to be brave and do the whole designing thing. I've been designing my own stuff for a long time, but to actually, and that's a whole separate story. But, and I'll come back to where Works by ABC came from. But I got to the point, I'm like, all right, I got it. Works by ABC. How do I change it? And what I discovered is that the account I used was like associated with my very general Gmail account that I use as my regular email. And if I wanted to change my name on YouTube, it was going to show up, I'm sending an email to whoever, and it was going to show up as coming from Works by ABC. And I'm like, no, that's something has nothing to do with my stitching world. That's the, neighbor down the street or something. And I got so frustrated and I learned that I couldn't, if I wanted to completely separate the two, the only way to do it, I don't know if things have changed, okay, was to start over. And at that point I had, enough of subscribers and enough of the beginning of a community. I didn't want to lose it.
Right.
I said, you know what? I'm just going to stick with this. And so that's why to this day, my my Flosstube channel is just Arlene Cohen. Now, it was not that long ago. I want to say like it was actually around Nashville this year that some people were very kindly mentioning some of my new designs on their videos. And I saw more than once people, and I've seen this before, but it really stood out to me. Like you're referencing somebody, and so in the notes you put, like I'm sure you're going to do for me, you put the links to whatever. So my link has always shown up as, youtube.com/, sixth grade field trip videos. And I finally put together why it was that I had a YouTube account. So, like 10 years ago, I was in charge of a sixth grade field trip to a math museum. The kids had to do a little thing. We didn't want them bringing their iPads, so the teachers had, like, the chaperone of each group, and the kids had to do a little video explaining they knew it was a great little assignment. And then I had all these teachers saying, well, what do you want us to do with these videos? And I had to come a dumping ground somewhere. So again, I think like the tech person said, this is going to be the best way to do it, at least at that time. So I had this dumping ground of a YouTube place. They all uploaded it. Those videos are all gone. I don't know. Again, the tech person probably helped me figure out what to do with them. But that was the name that was associated with it. And I thought, this is crazy, sixth grade field trip videos. I finally learned because that, and I think I laughed about it on one of my videos, and some people gave me some suggestions, and I was able to change that. So now when you go to put my link, it'll be youtube.com/whatever, but then it says at Works by ABC. So it's no longer the sixth grade field trip. But that's my first piece of advice. If you are thinking about a video, make sure you're starting with a brand new account for YouTube. And call it whatever you want. If you just call it, Joe Schmo, Jane Schmo, whatever, and then 2 months from now come up with your great, cool, I'm a great Stitcher name, you can change it and it's not going to affect like your personal email or anything. Like that was the reason why that's why I am not, that is why I'm not Works by ABC clearly on YouTube, because of how I started.
That's
So just, and to go back to the Works by ABC piece, my initials are ABC, Arlene Beth Cohen. My middle name is Beth. It's not like short for Elizabeth, it's just Beth. And when, like I said, this was within a couple of months, was like, well, maybe I'll be brave and do this whole designer thing. I can open an Etsy store without too much difficulty, I think. And I was brainstorming names, and I was looking at designers, and some designers like use their name and so on. And I thought, well, let me play with my initials. And I originally wanted to be ABC Works, because I was going to be a way I was going to work. I was going to bring in a stitching life in a more formal way than I'd had before. And the name ABC Works was already taken on Etsy. I haven't looked lately, but it was like a defunct store. There was nothing listed. There was nothing had been listed, but because it was a name that was taken, I couldn't use it. And that's when, in more brainstorming, I flipped it around to become Works by ABC. And that's where the name comes from.
And I didn't know your middle name, but I was wondering if it had something to do with your name, because you put 2 and 2 together. I think that's clever.
Yeah.
Another good piece of advice for people who are starting out, I think, is it would be good if you used the same name across your like social media platforms for your stitching. Because I know some use a different name for Flosstube and then some use a different name for Instagram. It's so much easier if you want to be found or seen to have kind of the same name across everything. So
and that's one of the issues I do run into, is that because I'm not Works by ABC formally on YouTube, and I mean, there's a reason why, and but it is, I totally agree with you. It's definitely, if you can, whatever you're going to be, use it everywhere you're going to use it.
If you can, because sometimes they're taken, but yeah, for sure. So I love asking this question to designers, and it's, where do you get your design influence from?
And my answer is just about everywhere and anywhere. I sometimes in talking to other people, what is your design style? And I would say just very eclectic. I'll go with anything that is interesting to me. And so, sure, there's certain categories. I have a lot of geometrically inspired things, and that comes from my life as a math teacher and the math background and all of that. I have a lot of designs that are related to lace, and that when we get to the question of what other hobbies you have, we'll return to that. But so there's a lot of lace designs I have. Some number of years ago, there was, I learned about this pattern books that existed like in the 15th, 16th, 17th centuries, and which have been scanned and you can find online. And a lot of them were like for embroidery or things like that, for like royalty. But I was fascinated because sometimes you look at them and you're thinking, well, stick in some color and that could be a modern day cross stitch. And so I started exploring a lot of that world, because again, a lot of them, these books that have been owned by, institutions, have put them online, and there's certainly no copyright on something from 1682. So I started exploring that, and then just it goes from there. I just, as I'm sure many designers do, just keep a little notebook where I'm always referring back to. I don't know about you right now, but I am thinking ahead to some Nashville designs and so on. And I was just looking back at my various pieces in my notebook, looking for some new inspiration, looking for something I'd already written down that might be an inspiration in the future. So I always just keep my eyes open. When I can, I love to go to museums. I like to scroll around on museum websites because they have some amazing things that you just, it doesn't matter if you can even physically go to the museum, you'll see more online. I love old books and finding anything that you find in old books. I'm always, when I'm out and about, looking at geometric things, the tiles on the floor, what's going on in the ceiling, all kinds of things like that. Um, just anything, and that's just it. I don't know how else to say it. So, um, anything that appeals, I'm like, can I turn this into a cross stitch? One of the designs I came out with for Needlework Marketplace, I was on, I don't think I really knew about ahead of time. Google has an arts and culture site where they basically are pulling images from a lot of sources, including like museums or something. And I was looking for something else, and I stumbled upon an image that was a soup plate that was at a museum. And it had this just really unique geometric thing, and it just appealed to me from the geometry of it, enough so that I'm like, can I turn that into a stitching design of some kind?
Love that.
So I love to look for things like that, sometimes where you just don't know where your inspiration is going to come from.
Yep.
And I produce what I create, and I stitch the things that I love to stitch. And sometimes I wonder, well, how many people are going to be interested in stitching this? But I'm interested. So hopefully there's some other people out there that would like it. So,
Yeah. And I like that if coming from a designer's point of view, because I guess there's different types of designers. I don't want to bucket us all into one thing, but I think you and I are similar in the ways like I design from personal, like family, my adventures with my husband. I don't
mhm,
just randomly kind of design something, if that makes sense. And I
totally.
think you're the same way. You get inspired by things that you are drawn to or have meaning to you. And I don't know, I like the idea of just that design, although maybe to somebody else it doesn't mean anything, but a lot of my designs, I'll put a little blurb on the back and be like, why I designed this, blah, blah, blah.
Uh-huh.
I like that personal aspect because it just makes it that much more special. So I think that's really neat that you also, kind
Yep.
of do that too. So love it. So we've alluded to this a little bit, but how did you learn to stitch and how long have you been stitching?
Well, I've been stitching through high school, so maybe we don't need to put a number on how many years that is. How did I learn to stitch? And I've shared this. I can't say exactly how I learned to stitch. I know when I was little, um, my mom, especially during the summer, would bring us, my sisters and I, to like a local craft store. I mean, this is like the equivalent of a small town Michael's, but what wasn't a. And there'd be a lady there that would have all these little kits for kids, and every summer we'd pick out a few and do them and whatever. And I feel like somewhere in there was learning the basic idea of making X's. Okay, but I don't have a specific time. My mom never. She was not she did crochet, but that was the extent of her like thread world, shall we say. So I feel like I must have learned the physical aspects of cross stitch from one of those little summertime kits classes, the lady at the store. So then it's all the more bizarre that what my first real cross stitch was. And I tell this sort of like, if the gods are out there, how this came to be. Um, I feel like there was some other, maybe a little embroidery kind of, again, another one of those little kits. When I was in high school, and it was definitely before I was driving, so about 15, I got a magazine in the mail. There is no explanation on why this magazine came addressed to me. Like it doesn't make any sense, okay? But it was what they call cross stitch and country crafts. And it was like this sample magazine that was being sent out. Hey, purchase a subscription. Here's a sample of the magazine. And how my name got on some sort of list is one of those mysteries. And boy, am I thankful for that to this day. And so in that magazine, there was an image and a number of, I've shown this on my videos. And actually, if you were to look at the thumbnail, my very first video, it's me holding this up. It's a picture of a little girl having a tea party with her dolls, and it was this like full coverage, I don't know, like 60 colors. And I was so fascinated by the idea that that was on fabric created with thread. Like, I, it was so different from the little kits that lady had at her store. Okay. And there was something about it that appealed to me. And I mean, to this day, there are times, and I'm sure everyone is like this in every different aspects of their life. Sometimes you latch onto something and you just can't let it go, whether it's an idea for something or whatever. an activity you're going to do, whatever. And there was something about that that I told myself, I want to do this. I want to figure this out. There was enough in the magazine for me to kind of figure out. And I understood that all those numbers were thread colors. And I think I had seen in stores those. Okay. So again, this is before I was driving. So I had to get my mom to bring me to, again, it was like a local craft store, but a fairly large one. And I remember sitting in the aisle, pulling out all those threads, probably like I said, about 60 colors. And there was something that said about 18 count. And I saw that there was this fabric that said 18 count. I'm like, all right, I'm on this. Okay.
That's it,
So
that's it.
okay. I'm pulling these threads. My mom had wandered off. She comes back and she sees me pulling this pile. And she says to me, and this is she said, Arlene, or she gave me a look. And I knew what that look was. She's like, I knew that look was, Arlene, I'm not buying that for you. Like because I knew, okay. And I knew that look. And I said, Mom, I'm spending my babysitting money on this. Okay. So I cut her off. And she said, and it wasn't malicious or anything. She just said what was a very good observation. Arlene, I don't know why you're doing that because you're never going to finish that. It's one thing to spend $10. I don't remember how much I was spending on this. But for me at the time, it was an accurate statement that I often got all excited about something and then abandoned it. And this was a pretty expensive thing that I was spending my babysitting money. Well, whatever it was, maybe it was just because of the way she said that, I was like, well, I better finish this.
Yep, that would have been me.
And I loved how it evolved on the fabric and everything took off from there. That's really the beginning of my, again, I kind of put aside the little kids stuff. The real beginning of my cross stitching was that.
It's incredible for stitching. I kind of try to explain it to people who say that they don't have the patience or the time or blah blah blah, whatever they say. It's the equivalent of like painting, I think. But with floss, because these pieces can look like they're a painting on the wall if you don't get up close and see all the little X's. It's
Mhm.
incredible what you can do with a string of floss and some.
Exactly.
It's
Exactly.
crazy.
And there's some people this just have never been exposed to anything like that.
Yeah, yeah.
And I always keep in mind that there's all kinds of worlds out there that, like, I love going to used book sales. And there was a time I was a used book sale because I remember sending a picture to a friend and just laughing about it. It was this manual, something about barbershop quartets. And it was like the annual meeting of the guilds of the barbershop quartets. And it was all this detailed information. And I remember just thinking, okay, whatever. Okay. But I remember thinking, but the people who are reading this are so into their world. They love their world. They have an annual meeting of people who get together about their world. And from that perspective, I could so appreciate it. I don't need to be a part of a barbershop quartet or be in
Right.
an audience to completely understand the idea that sometimes, and I hope as much as possible for other people, it doesn't have to be a stitching world. I hope everyone can find whatever piece of the world, of a world that they belong in or that they want to be a part of, and that whatever it is, whatever interest it is, that they have that way to come together with other people in a community, whether it's physically or virtually or whatever, that love the things you love. So even when I can't love barbershop quartets, I can appreciate it. And I
Yes,
think that's
100%. I love that. Yeah, being a part of a community is amazing, regardless of what it is. It really is amazing. So do you happen to have a favorite project that you've stitched so far?
so this was probably the question that I agonized over the
A
most
lot of
because
people do. It's a challenging question.
it is. And you know, there's an element of all my designs. It's like, well, I can't play favorites, can I? And I'm like, well, I kind of could. And then, my stitching world is two parts. It's from before I was putting out designs. Some of the things I created were my own designs, but more often than not, it would be a pattern that I then changed or adjusted or whatever to my own liking. Um, and then since I started being a designer. And so I'm like, well, I could come up with answers for both of those, can't I? And I will also say this, I'll show a couple of things and I'll also say, but some of the things I'm working on right now might become one of my favorites in the
Yeah,
future.
that happens.
So this, and I said we talk a little bit about my lace pieces. This is exquisite lace. It came out at Nashville this past year, 2023. If you were to like be on my Etsy store and just like search lace, you would see a number of the designs that I do that are based off of lace, often like tablecloths or runners or things like that. And I just love how this one turned out. I love it.
Stunning. It
Um,
it looks like lace.
yeah, well, and the other thing is that it was so hard to get a picture that did not look like a computer generated thing. You
Yeah,
know,
I could see that.
I mean, I'm looking at it right now and it looks
Yeah.
like, look at the picture. So I absolutely loved stitching this, and I loved how many people loved it as well. So this in the moment is pretty high up there as one of my favorite pieces.
That is-
And then sort of on a, I don't say a flip side, but in a totally different way, another thing that that came out this past year at Nashville that I just loved, and it sort of shows a different side of me. I got a symbol here. Hold on one second. Um, was
I knew,
oops.
yep, I figured you were gonna, I saw those.
Yep.
Oh,
So these nesting dolls, there we go, are made from perforated paper, and I did that so that they would actually nest.
that just
And
makes me think of my grandma. I love that. I love that.
um, and I mean, this is an example. I know this gets into some other question, but that's okay. I'm going to jump around a little bit. In terms of how long does it take to come up with an idea or something, this was literally an idea that was percolating easily for 3 years. Probably even longer. Fairly early on, I don't know in what context, I saw nesting dolls. I was somewhere, whatever, and I thought, huh, can I do something cross stitch? And the idea of doing something three-dimensional, not just a flat, because I knew there were flat designs out there. And I just kept getting stuck in what way could I use, what could I use to help them nest? I even had, you can get like blank wooden ones that you could like paint for yourself. And so
Mm,
I'd gotten a set of those blank ones. I'm like, well, maybe I could just like, put a strip of cross stitch around them or something. And nothing I came up with worked. And it was just one of those ideas that you just put in the back of your head. You just never know when something might give you an answer.
yeah,
And I very clearly at my New Jersey retreat, not 2023, but in 2022, I was talking with a friend who always loved to stitch on perforated paper. And there was something about that conversation, flat perforated paper, that made me realize, wait a second, there's a stiffness that could work for 3 dimensions. And that's, again, an idea that just had to keep in the back of my head. And eventually there was a solution to it.
it's such a
So
pretty design
that,
too.
so those are two examples of favorite things, but I also didn't want to like bypass something that I think is just really important. And my stitching world has not just been about cross stitch, as I mentioned before. I do black work designs. I have done some canvas work designs. I haven't done those since my first year or so, but I like doing the black work designs when I can. But my whole stitching world has so many other kinds of stitching. If you ever watch my Flosstube videos, you would see I sometimes share about this. And so I also wanted to share, and it's hard to pick a favorite piece from my before Works by ABC world. But what I wanted to share is one of my favorites. And this is from before I knew anything about non-glare glass. So you have to kind of bear with me here. And this is a canvas work piece. And so the reason this was the first piece I did that basically wasn't cross stitch. And it came a long time ago when I was in another context, basically in a stitching store, an LNS. And there was all the cross stitch stuff. And then there was a whole section of other things. And I was like, huh, let me go explore those other things. And this idea that you could do more with fabric and thread than just make an X was like, huh, I want to explore this. So this, and it's called Wheels of Color by Ginny Moreau. She was a well known in the counted canvas world. She passed away a long time ago. You can still get this design and her other designs because her family sold the copyright. I think I've got this. Somebody still owns the copyright, so you can still buy these designs. And from her work, I just learned so much about other worlds of stitching. And so this was the transition piece for me. And it's not that I never did cross stitch afterwards, because I certainly, that wasn't true. But this was, I consider, my transition piece to learning about other stitching worlds. Um, and the other pre Works by ABC piece I would have brought up is just so large, it's hanging down there. But I just want to give credit to the fact that there's another piece that I did that where, because of what I was doing with it, I basically learned so much about color theory, complementary and supplementary and all the things related to the color wheel. And that was an incredible learning experience for me. And so I will always treasure that. I always treasure that piece as a part of one of my favorites. And again, it's just so large, I didn't bring it up. Um, so, and I could have sat here and given you at least 10 others that would sort of count as my favorites, but that's what I came up with.
I that lace piece is absolutely stunning. But those nesting dolls, my grandma is no longer with us, but she had things like that in her home, like the nesting dolls and stuff like that.
Mhm.
And when I saw those, when you released them, I was like, that's incredible. Like I have to stitch them at some point.
Uh-huh.
Just just to think about my grandma. So that, I mean, it's incredible that it's cross stitch, but yet like, it's also nesting dolls.
Yes,
Oh,
exactly.
blows my
And
mind.
hey, I learned there's an emoji for these nesting dolls.
Really?
Like, yes, look it up. Type, I guess when you search like nest, I forget how, I think you just search nesting dolls and it'll show up. But yeah, no, there's an emoji for it.
Just learning all sorts of things.
Mhm.
um so what do you enjoy most about stitching?
I mean, what don't I? For
Yeah.
me, stitching is, it's meditation, it's calmness, it's like if I'm not stitching, if a day goes by and I'm not stitching, it's like I feel it, you know? And so what it brings to me, and whatever project I'm working on, whatever the end goal of it, if it's something I'm loving stitching and something I'm just stitching, it's about the physical process and how that calms me and how that just centers me or whatever. Most of the time, listening slash watching to something, but sometimes you just need silence and just,
Yeah.
and I realize some people will do, yoga or meditation in that kind of silence. For me, when I need that silence, I need to be stitching, you
Yep.
know?
Mm-hmm.
So that's, I mean, I feel like some people will answer, oh, I love the kitting up part, or I love the finish, it's the process for me that I just love.
Yeah. I'm the same way. I do watch like Flosstube and stuff when I stitch for the most part when I'm by myself. Um, but if I'm like downstairs, I'll stitch downstairs on the couch while my husband's, playing his game or something on the computer. And it's quiet because I'll have the sound down. And I love the sound of just listening to the floss go through the fabric.
Mm.
And it's just something, and it takes me back to when people say I don't have the patience, I don't have the time. There's always those people who've never experienced stitching that always say that, and that's what I think of is like, but it gives you that patience, it gives you that centering, that calmness. You just have to try it to realize, if it see if it's for you or not. But yeah, that just that sound of, it's just like a meditative thing, and I love it.
Yeah.
Love it.
And I guess the advantage when you're watching Flosstube as opposed to, I don't know, some action movie or something, is that you really don't need to watch. You listen, and
Yeah.
often somebody says, all right, look up right now, kind
Yeah,
of thing.
right? Because we all know.
Because we all know. So I struggle when there is something that I'm on television that it's like, but I don't want to watch, I just want to listen, but oh, that's making me look up, and now I'm getting all distracted because I'm not getting the stitching done, kind of thing. So, you know,
That's why you do fill-in. There's
yeah,
always a fill-in project for that.
good
Or
point.
that you get together. So fill in.
Mhm.
So we alluded to this a little bit, but we're now to the question of like your time frame and process from your initial vision to like when you release the product.
Yep, there's no number, there's
Yep.
nothing it all varies, Like I said, the nesting doll idea was percolating for the longest time, and I compare that with one of the smaller designs I just put out at Needlework Marketplace sort of came together within a couple of weeks. It's anything that makes sense. With the structure of the year of a Nashville, a market in March, and whatever online thing might be happening in August, that's really a helpful structure. And then I try to put out something small in the seasons between those times.
Yep.
And so there is a little bit of kind of thinking ahead from that perspective, but also acknowledging if something isn't, ready to go, I'm just going to put it in my little notebook and save it until it does make sense. So there's just no rhyme or reason to there's no way to answer what is my time frame. It's whatever makes sense.
Yeah. And I'm still fair. I'm still new. I've only been designing like a year and a half, and I think that question, I could see where there's no time frame. Like I will, most of my stuff is small, so like I can get that designed in such a short amount of time. Reproductions obviously take longer, but yeah, the time frame process, if you have set releases through the year, I guess that helps.
Mhm.
Still learning schedules and stuff like that, but
Well, and it was the advice of another designer that basically, I mean, I think I basically asked her, how often do you put out new stuff or something like that? And she gave me that idea of a structure. And that was really helpful. And it doesn't mean I won't ever like break that structure,
right.
but that's just something that has worked for me to kind of be thinking ahead to stuff. And well, that's the way I'm going for right now.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, that helps. Any advice, given to, I know there's a lot of newer designers than me too that have come out, and a couple have reached out to me, and I'm like, I'm still new, so I don't know what
You
kind
know,
of
I
thing. But you just got to do you, like whatever, you have a design ready, release it, that kind of thing. So yeah, I guess there's really no time frame kind of thing to stick to. So all right, we're gonna get out of stitchy talk a little bit, learn a little bit more about you. So do you happen to have a favorite genre of book or movie?
So I do love historical fiction. If I were to look at, not if, when I went, I keep books that I've read, a list of books, and the vast majority over the last few years have been historical fiction. And I think that goes with my like storytelling interest in story kind of nature. Because and I've had this conversation with some book people as well. The difference between a historical fiction book that is specifically related to something that is real. I mean, obviously a lot of it has been fictionalized versus a historical fiction which is just a made up story, but it takes place in a certain time period that makes it historical. So I love it when there's like a real story at its heart. Like right now, I'm reading a book called The First Ladies, and I should have written down the name of the author because it's always good to give credit where credit is due. It's two women, and The First Ladies is about the very real relationship between Eleanor Roosevelt and Mary McLeod Bethune, and I hope I'm pronouncing it correctly. And these two authors worked together on a previous book called The Personal Librarian, which is the true fictionalized story of JP Morgan and the woman who was his personal librarian. And what I love after reading such a book is to then go and, well, how much of it was true? You know what? Let me go find a talk that the authors did. These two women did amazing. I found lots of talks that they did online after reading The Personal Librarian, but I'm refraining. I'm not letting myself do any research, anything until I finish reading
You
to
gotta
then
finish.
go, because a few things have shown. I feel like I've always had an interest like in the first ladies and some history and stuff like that, but there's already been a few things that have shown up in that book that I'm very curious to find out how much of that was completely fictionalized and how much do they have some sources that indicate some of these things. um so yeah, so a lot of historical fiction is what I realize. I do like biographies on occasion. I listen to podcasts a lot, and I'm like many people into the true crime world of podcasting. But that said, I just started a podcast that's about Laura Ingalls Wilder,
Oh,
and I was remembering a biography, if not more than one biography that I've read of her a few years ago, and now it's like right? When I'm done with my First Lady's book, I think I want to go back and read another biography of Laura Ingalls Wilder. So, that's those are the worlds that I love. Fictions of various kind. I've never been into fantasy. I've never been into science fiction. Um, I have times where I have been like John Grisham, like a thriller, keep your attention. Got to
Yep.
keep the attention. And in all honesty, that I say that mostly because right at the beginning of the pandemic, like I was at the library on a Saturday and things were already happening, and I remember thinking this library is going to close. Let me load up on a whole bunch of books. And I seriously I like took out almost every John Grisham that the library had.
Oh,
And
wow.
I think I had just finished reading like one of the new ones, so that's why I had it in my head. And and then the library's closed for a few months, and I had all these books, and it was exactly what was needed at that time, like no brainer,
Yep.
interesting enough that it kept my attention. It for me, I'm so glad in that moment I thought, let me just take all the John Grishams.
Smart
So
thinking.
there's times I've gone through things like that with like a thriller kind of thing, but like I said, historical fiction has mostly been where I've been the last few years.
So, if you could choose to do anything for a day, what would it be?
I mean, a lot of it is mostly how I spend my days. I think the idea certainly of stitching and being in an environment that feels comfortable and welcoming. So yes, that's certainly my home and my home-based stitching. But even like when I go to like going to a retreat I went to in August, that I was like, this just feels so right. And it'd been so long since I'd been at a retreat that I hadn't organized myself.
Yeah.
I love on a beautiful day being outside. When I can finagle, depending on what project I'm working on, to be stitching outside on a beautiful day, like no humidity, none of that kind of 95 degrees, which is what it is today.
Oh,
Like that's like the perfect day for me. So I don't need to go places. I don't need to do things. I just need to kind of keep that calmness that is what's most pleasurable to me. So.
I love that you basically live your perfect day.
Well, I'm not gonna say every day is a perfect
Yeah,
day.
right.
There's definitely some aspects of my teaching life um, that like everyone else has their challenges and everything like that. But especially like during the summertime, I certainly when I can compartmentalize pieces of life and put the difficult or challenging or more brain powered things in one place, and I can keep the things that I truly love and am passionate about in another place. Anytime I can focus on that passionate side, that's what is most appealing to me.
I love that. It's nice. So we've touched on this also, but we're going to go a little bit more in depth. What other hobbies do you have besides cross
I'm
stitch?
looking at the questions right here. So
Yeah.
here comes. And so I don't know how much you are familiar with me or things I've shown on my video, but bob and lace is, so I was going to talk about my lace world. I will fully admit the last few years during the pandemic and stuff, lace hasn't been as much as it was before, and I'm hoping, it's just about balance and everything like that. So a number of years ago I was at like a county fair kind of thing, and they had all people kind of demonstrating, like glass blowing and all kinds of stuff, and there were some women, or one woman in particular, sitting there making bobbin lace, and I was just so fascinated. And my friends, they were like, they wanted to keep going. I'm like, I'll catch up with you in a little bit. Well, an hour later, they circled back around and found me still sitting there and talking to this woman. Talk about something you've never seen before and are fascinated about. So, bobbin lace is one of the ways that lace was made before machines made lace. There's bobbin lace and needle lace, are basically the two categories. And it is a world that I just really loved learning about. And actually, this is usually where I sit when I'm making my Flosstube videos, and usually see my bookshelves. And multiple shelves are books about lace and patterns and designs and stuff like that. And so, and I know this is sometimes people are like, what do you mean by that? So I have I've seen, I didn't not invent this idea. I got the idea from someone else. I have on my phone a clear case. And so this is a piece of bobbin lace. And that way I can literally carry around with me what bobbin lace could be. And that's
Cool.
that's lace that I made. I also pulled off the wall. Um, I a lot of the lace that I make um, are little things that I just, in effect, like put in the equivalent of a stitch journal. But I do have a few things that I've made that I've framed and hung up, and so this is one of them. This is a fan. I did not like these are wood fan sticks. You can buy the fan sticks, and none of this is things I've designed. This is
Oh my.
patterns. And so then I also just to sorry, that's a what do you call shadow box keys. So I pulled this out to hopefully give the short little understanding of bobbin. So what does bobbin lace look like? Now this is a small one and I can sort of tilt it up. So you work on a pillow and it's not like the pillow you sleep on. These are called lace pillows. And what you see here are bobbins. And if you think about like a sewing machine bobbin, it serves the same purpose. It holds thread, it's just a different shape. And I'm going to hold these down so you can see evolving there
Oh
is a
my
piece of lace.
God.
And there's a whole bunch of pins. And of course, the first question people have is, well, when you take the pins out, doesn't it all fall apart? Which is, of course, what I thought when I was sitting there all
Right.
those years
That's what you
just
would
talking
think.
to this lady. And I mean, it's not the same as weaving. I mean, weaving is a different thing, but the concept of weaving, when you put a bunch of threads together in a certain way, it's not going to fall apart. Well,
Yep.
that aspect is the same. And this piece has, I don't remember how, you always talk about in pairs. I think this has like 18 pairs or something. Um, I'm just looking, whatever. But I've done, so you can have lace designs that have very few pairs, like 6 or 8 pairs, but I've also gone more than 100. So you can get a lot of bobbins going at one time. What will it be if I ever finish it? This is from a magazine, um, The Idea of a Chessboard.
Oh, cool.
There's 16 different designs, and you would repeat them for each. And this is the first one. Oh, I'm paper. Um,
Blowing
so
my mind. This is really cool. Oh
this
my God.
is um it's hard for me to show it. So the one that's on my pillow now is only the second one. So if I ever finish 64 of them, would be a huge thing. It's just, again, when you discover something that you're just so interested in. Now, I love sharing this with stitchers. I love sharing, just like, stitchers who share their quilting and their knitting and stuff
Right.
like that. And again, it's sort of like, well, something I do a little different, but usually there's interest in seeing something that's so different. I also usually get the, wow, that's cool. How can I give it a try? And here's the challenge with bobbin lace. Like if you have someone that says to you, that cross stitching looks pretty cool. Could you show me how to do it? You would go, you'd take a scrap of fabric, you'd pull out some DMC floss, you'd hand them a needle, and in 10 minutes, you could basically show them what they need to show.
Yeah. Yep.
Bobbin lace involves stuff, like you need a thing to put the bobbins on. You need bobbins. You need a pad, like it's not something that you like to start a new project. You got to wind all those bobbins. I mean, that alone takes forever. So it's so unfortunate that when I introduce it, and I get someone who's like interested, it's hard to say, okay, here's what you do to take the next step. Now, like almost anything else these days, you can go on YouTube and you can find people that are lacing. And when you do bobbin lace, you're moving the bobbins with your fingers. And, you will see some on YouTube that go incredibly quickly. I don't go quickly by any means. Most of the time, you will see hands that are overhand, but there are some styles where people work in effect underhand. Palms up versus palms down is what it's called. There is an incredible lace tradition around the world, mostly focused in Europe, but all different styles of lace. So, this is a particular style that is very geometric, and my fan is very geometric. This is, while there's definitely geometry to it, it's because it's based on a different kind of grid. This is a lace, it's not, it's not Buck's Point. It's another kind of lace that is just based in a different way. It comes from a different country. So you start to learn all kinds of new things about a new world. And so this, and sure, I'll say, because of the pandemic, my monthly lace group basically stopped meeting. And that monthly group was really keeping me going on having a project at hand. And so I started these little guys, I don't know, a year or so ago, when I was like, you know what, I really want to get back into this, but I don't want to commit to a large, super large, 100 pairs of bobbins uh, project. And part of that is also because, let's just say you're stitching on a cross stitch and you're done. You're like, not done. You're like, I'm sick of this. I need to put it away.
Yep.
Maybe you pull off the hoop and the Q snaps, but you put it aside and you can then use your hoop or your Q. Okay. It's not so easy to put aside a bobbin lace project. Like, if I'm putting this aside, I'm not taking all these bobbins off, and like, I can't use this pillow for anything else. So I do have a few pillows, and I do have, like, like I said, a year ago, I have two pillows with two fairly large projects on them, neither of which I really wanted to get into. And like with stitching projects, you kind of collect the patterns and so on. And I had some magazines with marked out some stuff, as well as I have all these books, and none of them had anything that appealed to me. And when I found this in my sticky notes, I'm like, perfect. I can do one little thing. If I never do the other 63, that's okay. But this was sort of the perfect little project. And also because it's a small pillow. Some of the other pillows I have are quite large. So that's like the 2-minute version of bobbin lace. And for anyone who's watching this and is interested, I just go on YouTube, and you can see a lot more of what it is. And there's a whole lace world. There is a few times I've gone to the yearly lace conventions, where again, you're in a room with a couple hundred people that all love doing what you love doing. It doesn't get any better than that. So
That blows my mind. That
I'm
really,
thinking, when that question has gotten asked in your other videos, no one has responded, bobbin lace.
no, nobody has. No, that that fan is like, oh my gosh.
Well, I could have, well, there's other pieces. I was debating between two pieces to that are framed to show you. But well, since it's right available, I'll show you something else really
Yes, I'm actually really loving this.
So uh so when it comes to threads for lace, I mean, thread is thread. You can use anything. When you are doing bobbin lace, you're sometimes very gently tugging. And
Mhm,
because of that, there's some threads that are just too weak or wouldn't be great, kind of thing.
mhm.
And DMC floss is one of them. It's not that you can't do bobbin lace with DMC floss. It just, the times I have on a big project, it became really annoying because I'd be breaking threads. A few years ago, I was going to go to one of those yearly week-long lace conventions, and there's always a contest, and and there's always a theme, and the theme could be something like flowers, or I can't remember it, stars, or things like that.
Yes.
The theme that year, it was taking place in Indianapolis, and I think it was the state of Indiana was celebrating its 200th, its bicentennial. So the theme was 200. However you want to interpret that, which I just thought was such a creative thing, because that leaves open so many ways. And I can't tell you what I had gone to the convention the year before, and I remember thinking about this on the plane home and thinking, how could I do? Could I do 200 colors? I'm like, I don't think you can get lace thread in 200 colors, but what can you get it in? DMC. So this is my 200 colors.
Wow.
And so, and the only, like, these are all DM, and to do this little blob of DMC was doable in terms of, I mean, it took forever because you have to, like, what's called hanging on, you have to put them in, do what you need to do, in effect, weave them, then what's called throwing them out, which is to say no longer using them. And then you have to deal with all the thread ends. But this was actually, like, how do I do the colors? The DMC color card. Because if you hold it like this, think about a DMC color card. It starts with the reds and the pinks. And so that's what I did it with. So this is a case where I truly did combine my lace world and my stitching world. I will say this, there are very few lace pieces that I've designed myself. I'm just not at that level of lace abilities. And also there's so many beautiful things that I could be stitching that someone else has created, or I could be making lace that somebody else has created. So, but anyway, that was easy access for me to grab. There's plenty of other things, but we can move on to the next thing.
That's absolutely incredible. Just to learn more about that is just so cool. I don't think anybody's really ever touched on that at all in any of the interviews I've done.
Well,
Um,
and I mean, in the bigger picture, if you ever think, I mean, like you're wearing some blouse or something that has a little bit of lace on it, and you know it's made by some machine, probably in China or something, but to ever stop and look at, like portraits of royalty from the 1600s, they got lace all over them. And how did that lace come about in the 1600s? Well, it was being handmade mostly by women who were paid very little and going blind because of what they were doing. But so there, it kind of combines the history once again that I'm interested in.
yeah, yeah, that's neat. That's so cool. I love that. Um, this one is one of my most favorite questions that I love to
Uh-huh.
ask. Because it gets you thinking. How would your friends describe you?
So I admit, I I I very few things that I could say about myself. So I did what I know other people did, which is actually go and ask my friends. I need some
That
words
I
here. I
love that.
need. And so what I thought would would immediately, what could I respond? Well, I'm organized, and I the things that a number, especially my number of stitching friends see, the organized piece, and that's like doing a stitching retreat. And and where that leads is other things, but they helped me come up with words for this. So like I'm almost like embarrassed with how kind words that they wrote. So thoughtful, which I think is something that is important to me, to be thoughtful in the world. Compassionate, trustworthy, kind, talented, um, always acquiring new knowledge. And that, I mean, that's a piece that is just, I could say it's the teacher side of me, but no, it's the human being side of me. Um, Generous with time, inquisitive, value and appreciate others. I mean, all of these, it's just like, I mean, yes, I mean, these are the things that I think are important to me, that, and I just so appreciate that my friends were sort of seeing, putting to words to things that are important. And just sort of the caring about others and the caring about, that kind of aspect is important to me, and I'm glad my friends could recognize that. So those are just some of the things they said. And again, it makes me feel uncomfortable, but I'm sure you're probably encountering this with some of your other in your other interviews. So.
And I ask that question, I think, for that purpose, because you don't really sit there and think about something like that. You don't sit there and think about, for the most part, what my friends think of me or whatever. Um, and I think it's really good. I'm happy that you reached out to your friends, because some didn't, and they just kind of, just came up with words that they would hope that their friends.
Yeah.
But the purpose of the question was for people to kind of reach out to their friends and be like, hey, there's this question and this thing that I'm doing, and and it shouldn't make you feel uncomfortable, because that's you. That's what people see in you, and that means you're an amazing person, and
Mhm.
be proud of that. But yeah, I'm the same way. I feel very uncomfortable if I have to talk about myself, because people
Yeah.
are like, well, when are you going to get interviewed? I'm never getting interviewed. Me, I don't want to talk about myself. I just chat with people, and then stuff about me comes out. That's all I want to do. So yeah, it is uncomfortable to kind of focus on yourself and that kind of thing. But all those are great aspects, and you should be proud that your friends see you that way, for sure. So it's pretty incredible. Um, so how do you prefer to stitch? Do you use like a hoop, a Q-snap, in hand, that kind of thing?
I love scroll rods, like a scroll frame. And that is usually my go-to. If I have something small, I'll do a hoop, as long as it's small enough to fit within the hoop.
Okay.
Um, and I use a stand. I mean, that whenever it was, how many years ago that I saw this concept, I thought, oh my God, you can have both hands free. No longer have to like hurt and, or bend. Okay. So, my go-to is a stand that is attached to one of my scroll frames. I've tried Q snaps. It's never worked for me. I've never been an in-hand person. And even like on a small project that I'm using my hoop, I'll attach that to a stand just so that if unless there's no other way to do it, but hold it in hand. But because I've done so much stitching without needing either hand to hold anything, I like resent it if I have to use a hand.
Slows you down too.
And that, and that's what works for me. The scroll frame, just yeah, what works for me. Definitely magnifier as the eyes have gotten a little older. Although I'll say this, the first years and years ago, well before I ever thought I would need a magnifier to see things, I was doing a 32 count over one. It was a special little project that I was doing. And I was like telling, I can see this. I can see this. But then I don't, maybe I had a little handheld magnifier or something like that, that I just went to test it out. I'm like, wow, if I had a magnifier here, I think my stitching would be better. I'd be making better decisions about, which, okay. So that was the point where I did get like a magnifier. And then I was like, but I only need that for like 32 count over one. Um, but as it's evolved, no, I basically need magnification of some kind for all my stitching. So I really can't, at these days, can't stitch without magnification. And good light, obviously, if you're sitting in a ballroom during a stitching retreat, light is not optimal, but
Yeah,
when I'm sitting in my stitching spot downstairs, I got all the light I need because I set it up that way. So that's my stitching set.
for sure. I'm the same way. I've always been an Ada stitcher. Ada is just my jam. And
Mhm.
with doing reproductions and stitching other people's like designs, working on your B Hollander, I'm doing it on linen. I have bifocals, and then I need magnification on top of that
Mhm.
because linen, for some reason, I just cannot stitch on it. So I can't take it with me places without having this whole like crazy setup. So I have to take my Ada pieces with me places. But yeah, I'm right there with the magnification for sure. Do you
Mhm.
happen to have like a preferred fabric that you lean towards, or are you just kind of a whatever?
I'm very much a linen person.
Yeah.
I I've done like in recent years. I can't tell you the last time I stitched on Ada. It's how I started that 15-year-old me in the store and saw 18 count. That was Ada, okay. And I did, but again, before I even learned that there were more things. Um, and I will occasionally do an even weave, like a Jobelin or something, if that's just what feels right. But mostly, I'm a linen person. That's just what works for me.
Makes sense. Whatever you're comfortable with.
Exactly, exactly.
So I know you touched on this kind of a little bit too, that you're not like a huge big traveler, but do you have a favorite place that you've kind of traveled to? And did you bring any stitching or any of your crafts with you?
So I was trying to think about this, and the I don't travel that much. But what does stand out to me is a trip I did to France, geez, 10, no, more than 10 years ago at this point, about 10 years ago. And it was a group, it was a structured tour that was really focused on a lot of needlework stuff, or not necessarily like cross stitching retreat kind of thing. Um, and it was sort of like take it like traveling on my own, take a chance that this is going to be okay. Ended up meeting some wonderful people. We started out in Paris and we went to a an embroidery um I forget the word for it, but like they would do the embroidery for not for the, I don't think they were doing at that time for the royal family, because I have been to Hampton Court, which is where the Royal School of Needlework is. Um, but it was like we had this little embroidery lesson with this little old lady who like had done embroidery for tablecloths and stuff for like really rich people. I mean, amazing things. And then as a part of that trip was also, and it was once we left Paris and went to some other places, there was actually a big lace thing that was happening at that time. I think that's how I ended up finding this, hearing about this lady who did these tours. She had all different kinds of focuses in needlework world, but um, she knew that there was this bi biannual, semi-annual, when it happens every 2 years, lace event that was happening, and that year was going to be outside of Paris. And I thought, oh my God, I could go to that as well. And everyone on there was maybe 20 of us in this group, and there was one other person who was a lace maker. And she and I were so excited for that day of the tour. Okay. And by that point, I, four or five, a little group of friends. And I remember we get to this like convention center and we were given our tickets and like, all right, meet back here at 4 p.m. or whatever it was. And I remember my friend Mary turned to me and she said, I know you're going to want to go do this on your own. And I'm like, yeah. She's like, we are your friends, but these are your people. Go ahead, have a great day. We'll see you at the end. And because she knew she would enjoy walking around and seeing things, but she also knew I was seeing it from a different place. So I was thinking, so with your question, did I bring stitching on that trip? And I think, I've never been there's something about being outside of my space, other than going to like a stitching thing, that I just don't do well in stitching and bringing stitching with me. I go to visit my family. I usually bring something. I almost never take it out. It's just not, it's just like not right somehow. So I probably had brought some little thing and probably barely used it or barely stitched on it. And that's partially because I was being inspired by where we went to see the Bayou Tapestry. And then we went to this little store and had like a stitching lesson about the Bayou Tapestry and like making things. I mean, that was like the best trip I had ever done. Not that I've done that many trips to compare it to. Um, so that's really, again, I don't travel that much, but that trip to France just very much stands out in my mind.
Once in a lifetime incredible trip. It sounded
Yeah,
amazing.
yes, it was. It was.
Oh my goodness. So, what can you not do without for your stitching? Like your favorite go-to must-have?
There's other than the things I said before, I can't stitch in hand, so there needs to be, like I said, usually a scroll frame involved. Um, I'm not picky about the type of needles I use. Um, I need good magnification and light. I don't have things like, I know there's some people that are like, oh, I always need this tool or this pair of scissors or something. And I'm fairly easygoing when it comes to a lot of that stuff. Like I said, other than I need the stitching to be supported and I can't do it in hand. I mean, I suppose you could do anything if you give it a try. It has no appeal to me kind of thing.
Yeah, no. I've tried in hand and my hand cramps up. I have arthritis and in hand just doesn't work. So
Are you are you a hoop? Do you do hoops and Q snaps or just
I
scroll frames?
Q snaps and a lap stand for the most part. I just have like one of the little Case Creation baby lap stands that holds my Q snaps. It's on my lap and I can two-handed stitch, but I like it when I stitch when we go on road trips and our adventures. I'll bring something in a Q snap, but I can stitch in the vehicle fine, but holding that Q snap, it starts to get my elbow is in such like right now my elbow's in such pain um because of I think just holding that in such a position for X amount of time. So I need to start using lap stand more.
Well, you're lucky that you can do, I mean, I guess this goes back to the question you asked, because I can't stitch in a car, on a train, on a plane. Like, I just can't. I get, like, within 2 minutes, I'm all headachy and, and so, and maybe that's part of why I don't think about bringing stitching with me places kind of stuff. But if you go on long drives and can stitch in the car, man, that's like stitching time.
Yep.
So you're going to need to figure out some sort of like, car stand situation where you can brace your Q snap against something so it
Yeah.
doesn't have to be against your arm. Like that's
Yeah,
what.
I think in my Jeep there's the handlebar thing that's like right in front of me above my glove box, and I can lean it kind of on that if it's a bigger Q snap and do the two-handed stitching, but I just have to plan the right piece, I
Yeah,
guess, on it. But
sure.
yeah, but yeah, when my husband just drives, we'll go off into the mountains. And so we're on the freeway. I'm just stitching because there's nothing to look at. But then he's like, okay, time to put it away because he'll tell me when it's time to put it away because he wants me to see the sights and that kind of stuff. So it's kind of cool. Works out perfectly.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So this is a fun one because I like to see how all of our Stitcher brains kind of work. And
Mhm.
you mentioned you're an organized person. So how do you decide on what you're going to work on next for your projects then?
Well, so before Flosstube, I did not realize that people had more than one project going at a time. Like, I didn't understand that as a concept.
Yep.
You pick up a pattern, you stitch it, you move on to the next thing.
Yep.
So that was one of many things that I learned about other stitchers from starting for watching Flosstubes. And so I'm very much a one project at a time kind of person. It's not precise and accurate, and that's partially as a designer. I so right now, for example, I am stitching on projects that will be Nashville releases. And so um, almost everything there's some exceptions to that. I was going to say, mostly I'm stitching models of my own designs. I've never had any model stitchers. And that's partially because I don't think there's been a single design that when I, hit print for the chart, that it still remains exactly as it is when I'm done in the end. Whether it's actual stitches that have changed, color or thread that has changed. And so I just can't like abandon a design and say, go ahead, it's perfect as it is. Go ahead, you stitch it for me. So it is about what I'm planning for new releases and what comes next. For example, like one of the projects that I'm working on right now, which is a fairly large project for Nashville, but I'm all excited to start it. Everything was all ready to go, but I had to make sure I had things for Needlework Marketplace done. And so there was not resentfulness, that's too strong, but it was like, all right, I have to do that before I can get to start the big one. So sometimes there's a little bit of that in place, but really it's about what's coming up next and how do I need to plan things. Now, all that said about being a one project at a time kind of person, um, in the last few years, my whole teaching life has certainly, I've been doing a lot of stuff on Zoom and everything, and I've ended up having these little weird pieces of time in the middle of the day, half hour between students or whatever. And I started to realize I need to take better advantage of those little snippets of time. And usually the big main project that I'm sitting downstairs for any number of reasons, what I started doing was having something smaller, usually set up here. And this would be like in my middle of the day kind of project. And so because of that nature, because most of the time it was little snippets of time, I was trying to think about some of the smaller things. Again, models for new designs. Oh, that would make a good upstairs project. Oh, that's a big one. We're leaving that as a downstairs project. So yeah, so technically right now I have two projects going. um, and very unusual for me. They are both big projects, but it is a rare case where I've said, God, I really want to work on both of these, and now I got to split my time and do it that way. But sort of the short answer is whatever I'm thinking about ahead in terms of a model of something I've designed, and it kind of flows out from there in terms of I have at least one, if not two things planned, charted for Nashville. Haven't started yet, but then it just became, but I want to start the big one, so I'm going to start the big one. That's how I decide. I'm not, I see some of these floss tubes where people have, X number of whips and they have, they're spinning decision wheels and all the cool stuff that comes from it. And that's just not how I am as a stitcher.
Yeah.
What about you? Are you like, do you have the decision wheels and multiple
Now,
whips?
I've tried the decision wheels for like Mania. I don't like those. I don't like being told what to stitch. I would skip it. I find myself now, and I don't know if you feel like this because you do all your model stitching. For my first year, I pretty much did all my model stitching, and literally I came out with 3 to 5 designs every month because I wanted to be like, this
Going.
is I'm a designer. I want y'all to take me seriously. I'm not
Uh-huh.
doing this. And I felt like I was drowning because I have a lot of personal stitching that's not even my designs that I want to stitch, that I want up on my walls and all this other stuff. And I was finding the balance to be off. And I was stressed and I was, and I'm trying to have content for my floss tube that you can't show your designs that you're working on because it's supposed to be a surprise, blah, blah. So people started reaching out to model stitch, which blows my mind. And so like a lot of my smaller designs, I'd send off to them because there's not much tweaking when it comes to like my Bigfoot designs and stuff like that. And I'm stitching the larger designs. I don't really have like a rotation or anything, but I really try to continue stitching my personal whips on
Mm.
top of working on like a bigger model that I'm working on. And I find it's really hard to find the balance. I constantly feel like I'm falling behind. I get stressed out. Like I don't I don't know how to. I'm not an organized person, and I wish I was. So it's very hard to find that balance. I'm still learning, uh,
Mhm.
and I don't know if I will ever find the balance. But I am so thankful for the people that reached out that are willing to stitch for me, because I don't know if I don't know if I would make it,
Oh,
otherwise. I don't know how you do it with just,
well,
because you're working on national stuff and they're larger pieces. I have a piece that's 8 by 10, but it's a lot of fill-in right now, and I feel like it's not progressing at all. And I still have another piece to stitch for Nashville that I'm stitching for a
yeah.
model, and I'm like, how am I going to get this done? So I don't know how you do it with.
Well, the big piece I have going on right now, I admit there's some anxiety that's being produced of, all right, this, and I've told myself, all right, I'm never doing anything this big ever again. I love it. I love it. Um, but it is, again, it's hard to use the words personal stitching because that's not right. I'll only design things that I want to stitch.
Makes
And
sense.
so it isn't, there have been a few things over, I was going to bring a couple more to show, and I'm like, I'm showing 2 minutes already. Um, there have been some other thing. I'm sorry.
I was to say, I think it's incredible that you're showing tons of stuff. So makes it more
Well,
interesting.
because you know what, like I'm a visual learner. And so if I'm talking to somebody about like bobbin lace, I want to show it because I know if I were on the receiving end, I'm like, words in and out, show me what's going
Yeah.
on there.
Mhm.
So, but just the majority of my stitching are things that I want to stitch, and they happen to be things I've designed. So it's all okay. And some of the things that I'm thinking of, one particular project that I finished this summer, or yeah, this summer, um, just got in the rotate little bits. I want to use rotation. That sounds like too much of a whip kind of
Get it.
person, but I made sure to fit it in, working on it a little bit between other model stitching. Um, I guess I come to have some sense of how much I can get done for X amount of months ahead of time and so on, which is why this current large one is putting me a little bit on edge because I do have other things that I need to stitch.
Yep.
I also see this as a beginner designer, and this was before Nashville, before being, even picked up by Hoffman and so on. My first few designs, or first few, sets of designs, I wasn't stitching models for all of them. And that, again, something I learned from Flosstube, people holding up patterns and realizing, that's just a computer generated picture on the front. You can do that? And yeah, you can do that. Will it sell as well in person? No, okay. But even on a screen, if you have a good picture, sometimes you can't even tell. And hey, sometimes you have something and it, you know, um, so when I started as a designer, I did put out some things like that and had to kind of feel, all right, this is okay, right? Some people are buying these things. Now I did evolve to a point where it's like I don't feel comfortable doing that anymore. I'm not going to say I will never do it. Certainly in preparation for any in-person thing like a Nashville or even a virtual thing, I would want to have stitched models.
Yep.
But I just think about particularly that time of year between this past year, March and August, when I put out a couple things in May, I stitched them. But when I say put them out, I did a floss tube, I showed them Instagram, sent them to Hoffman for distributing. If I had some really incredible, well, one of them was a set of Biscornos, so you can't do it that way. But if I just had some really good mo computer picture, I don't know.
Yep.
So it's something that I put out there for anyone who's listening, who's thinking about the whole designing world. Um, I'm not saying do 100% like this, but be aware that there are designers that some very well-known designers that do this kind of thing a lot. So explore, go on whatever LNS or site that you find and scroll through. And granted, the majority are stitched models. Um, but just keep that as an open option, when, especially when you're beginning and you're trying to establish that routine of how do I balance all the things? How do I get people to eventually model stitch for me and all that? It's just, it's that piece of it that just I don't know. You have to kind of like figure out whatever works for you the best.
Yeah.
And I think just finding the balance of your pieces, which, and the whole it's like, let me help you organize. Let me help you make a list. Let me help, that's what I want to do to help you out here.
I've tried that. It's so funny because I'll have a model come back and for the most part, like the tag disappears off the fabric or something like that. And with all the stuff that I've gone through the past year with like all my health drama and all that stuff, I swear that I've made notes like this model with this person, this fabric, and I where are my notes kind of thing. And so I'll have to message the person and be like, do you to remember like the fabric that you sent me from like the fabric for the
Mhm.
model stitcher. Luckily most of the time they remember, but I feel that I really need to get more organized if I'm really gonna, do this. It's already been a
Are,
year and a half and I'm not organized. So
are you, I'm gonna, I mean, I'm not making this negative because I am. I'm still a paper and pencil person. It's not like I won't use all kinds of devices, but for me, having one spiral notebook where I'm not ripping out things from, which is, and I'm not saying every page in there is neatly organized, and sometimes I need to flip back and forth, but just to have, now for me, that's a physical notebook. For other people, it's, this section on your phone, the
yeah.
notes, the whatever, but that's my, like, to have a central depository of everything, repository, whatever.
Yeah, I know I get I have like my notes in my phone, but I don't know. I think I have a new stitching journal that just like came out that was released, and there's a section in the back. I think I'm going to try doing that and try using the actual journal and see if
Mhm.
that works. We'll see if I can stay organized, but I just feel
Well,
like it's an ongoing battle.
and so a piece of that I'll sometimes do is I'll make a note and I'll say pick and then a date, which is to say on my phone, I have a picture of something I'm talking about here, and I've written down the date so I can go back and find
You
that
can
picture.
search. I love. Oh
So
yeah.
that's just a way to add the visual as need, like my list of ideas. Check the picture on this date, check the picture on that date, the screenshot from that date. So just, I'm just sharing thoughts,
No,
if
I
any.
love that because I take a picture of the fabric and like the floss that I'm sending to whoever
Yeah.
and then make that note and it's there and that's why didn't I think of that? Thank you. That might
This
help.
way, you talk to people, you get new ideas on things. I
Yeah,
will, I
yeah.
will never forget a time where I was trying to ship something related to a school event, and I was making this whole complicated thing, and somebody just pointed out to me, well, I think UPS will stop at the school if you, and I'm like, oh my God, I had no idea. Like, teach me something that is helpful for me. So it's
Uh,
always,
yeah. Well, I've learned so much through this whole like this has been incredible just from the tips that you've given and the stuff that you've shown and it's been incredible. Uh
it's
we
also been a little long, and I hope that's
no
okay.
and people love the long interviews because we just keep them company as they're stitching, so yeah, I love long interviews.
Mhm.
But we are to the last question.
Mm.
This is my most favorite question
Uh-huh.
because it's been a cruddy past few years basically with the pandemic and everything. So I like to ask, what is the best thing that has happened to you within the past couple of years?
And I mean, this is, it's been the growth of my Works by ABC world, and just growing as a designer, as a stitcher, in learning pieces of this world, being so appreciative of the help and the advice and the support that I've gotten. And I'll give a little shout out to my stitch group, and my stitch group, or group of women, I didn't know any of them before I put on this stitching retreat. I mean, other than people I'd met through like Flosstube, I didn't, okay. And the stitching group basically evolved from that. And when the pandemic hit, we had actually started a little bit beforehand, but we started doing a regular Zoom. I think we were using like Google Hangouts at the beginning. And to have that kind of support on a pretty regular basis, and I'll share with them like upcoming designs. They get to see things that I wouldn't
My
necessarily
figure just
show.
too.
Um, and it's all of the, I'm one to say that for all the negatives of the last few years, there have been some positive pieces. And for me, something like having a stitch group that I don't need to necessarily physically go to, but have regular contact is huge. Um, and so, I guess in general, it's about expanding my stitching world, including with a group of friends, but also very much including my design world, and just kind of keep going and doing what I love doing. I'm not, I'm never going to be the biggest seller designer out there. I know that. But as long as I can keep going with what I love doing, that's what I want to do. And that it's all of this world that has been the biggest thing the last few years.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think with that, I've seen a lot of posts and a lot of comments about how people don't have local stitchy friends, or it's just them. I My local stitchy group actually started by a random comment left in some Facebook group,
Mhm.
and somebody else saw, or I saw somebody else's comment that they were local. They literally were right down the street from me. It was crazy. And I said, hey, why don't we start a stitching group? You know, and it's grown, and people drive for 45 minutes, hour away to come to the stitching group. So if you don't have a local friend, there are stitchers that are, there's at least another stitcher within, a couple hours of you. So give it a shot. Just post on social media, put yourself out there, because having a local stitchy group is incredible. I get to see mine every other week, and I show them sneak peeks of my designs, and I actually am stitching a model when I go there because it's the fill-in one, you know. Yeah.
Absolutely.
So, I
And
think that's one of the best things.
And
Yeah.
I'll even put it out there again. The pauses the last few years is that so many people, not 100%, but so many people that have always been wary of technology have become, I can join a Zoom room, I can do something
Yep.
like that. And so if you, speaking to somebody out there who feels like, well, she's saying she has some, I have nobody within a couple miles, there's ways to find people online that can meet in a virtual way. And maybe from like my stitch group, there actually are, when we get together in person, we're usually at a place that's about 45 minutes from me. There's a couple that come from almost 2 hours away. So I'm not saying that they're super local. I mean, it's
Yeah.
better than, whatever. But having a virtual group is still is a step that maybe if you can't get somewhere to be together physically, and there's, again, I'll use Facebook, but there's other ways to find physical virtual groups, and as long as you all know which time zone you're in, you're good to go. So that's just
When
another idea.
Yeah, when the pandemic hit, we all went into the crazy lockdown. I was hosting Zooms once or twice a week for a good amount of that time, and we had people from all over the world like joining in at random times. And if it weren't for the pandemic, yes, it sucked very much badly. But if it weren't for that, I wouldn't have been probably hosting those Zooms, like you wouldn't think that to do that. And I wouldn't have connected with my new friend that's in like Iceland and people in the UK, and still talk to them because of those Zooms that I hosted. It like technology is amazing. It can bring people together from all over the world. So, Zoom is just a few bucks if you want to go over the 40 minutes. It's worth it if you want to have, host a stitchy group or get together or whatever. It's definitely worth it. Definitely. Yeah.
I'm with you, totally agree.
Uh, this has been absolutely incredible. I have
I think
learned so many things. I appreciate you taking the time out of your day to spend and talk with me and to share with everybody all
I
your
just
stuff.
watching a couple of your interview videos, looking at your questions, I'm like, I'm gonna have a good time chatting with her. And I have. This has just been great. I've really enjoyed it.
Oh, I'm glad we finally got to connect. I think we saw each other briefly in Nashville.
Yes. For those who don't know, at Nashville, especially by Sunday, a lot of the designers try and get out and, if they have somebody helping them in their staying put in the room. But at least for me, it's like go out in little spurts and and if I walk by Becca's room and she was talking, I wasn't going to interrupt like a conversation with a store owner, and I do a little wave and then I go and then I have to get back to my room. Like there's
Yep.
only little snippets of time, but so we didn't make it exactly happen other
Yeah.
than a wave, but here we go. We made it happen now.
We made it happen now, and hopefully we'll make it happen in Nashville. We'll get to
Absolutely.
chat a little bit in person.
Absolutely.
So but this was incredible. I hope everybody enjoyed it. I hope that y'all took something away from the advice that was given, the information that was given. You were inspired, or we just kept you company.
Yes.
That's the least that we could do is just keep you company.
Uh-huh, uh-huh.
So thank you so very much. This was incredible. I'm speechless.
Thank you
Usually I'm
for
not
having
speechless.
Thank you for having me. I love it. Thank you.
All right, well, we'll say bye to everybody on Flosstube.
Bye.